Hello and welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast, and I am your host, Samuel. In this podcast, I interview top medical sales reps and leading medical sales executives across the entire country. And it doesn't matter what medical sales industry, from medical device to pharmaceutical to genetic testing to diagnostic lab, you name it. You will learn how to either break into the industry, be a top 5% performer within your role in sales, or climb the corporate ladder. Welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast. Today we have another special guest, and he goes by the name of Justin Poulin. Justin has over 20 years in the medical and surgical industry, both as a registered nurse and regional vice president of sales and operations. He's the host of several healthcare podcasts, including Beyond Clean podcast, which focuses on important topics, trends, and innovations in sterile processing. He also has other podcasts, including First Case, which is about the operating room, Power Supply, which is about purchasing and supply chain, and Transmission Control, which deals with infection control. Justin has exceptional leadership qualities and management experience in sales, clinical, and field operations. So Justin's seen a lot, and this is one of those episodes where you're gonna learn so much. He is the definition of someone that's truly enterprised himself in the medical sales space, and I don't want you to miss a minute. As always, we do our best to bring you innovative guests that are doing things differently in the medical sales space. So I really do hope you enjoy this interview. Hey, Justin, how are we doing today?
Really good. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to talk.
Absolutely. Glad to have you on the show. Just for a little bit of context for everybody listening, Hank, Melanie, and now you, Justin, you guys are all in the same kind of world. So this is a treat. But why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Justin Poulin. I am the CEO and co-founder of Beyond Clean, which you can kind of see on the screen there. We launched about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years. And since then have launched 3 sister brands, starting 2 years ago with First Case, who you mentioned, Melanie, joined the team and is our content creator there. We also had Power Supply, which launched 3 months after that, and that target audience is supply chain, whereas First Case is the operating room. And then we have Transmission Control, which is an audience and content curated for infection prevention and medical device space. So a number of different brands, and definitely have been innovating and have a couple of other endeavors too as an entrepreneur.
You guys are the medical sales master podcasters. This is the example, everyone. All right, so let's give some people some context. People that listen to the episode regularly, they do know Beyond Clean because they do know First Case and Beyond Clean because they've heard both Melanie and Hank. But we have new listeners all the time, and they're not familiar. So please tell us a little bit about what exactly is Beyond Clean, what's the goal and mission, and then maybe a little bit about what First Case is, and a little bit about some of the other brands that you just mentioned.
I'd really say there's a very common thread amongst all of the brands. They're educationally focused companies. We create content. Podcasts is one version. We do virtual conferences. We do a lot of social media posts and content creation. We work not only to create really great educational content, but we also work with our vendor and supplier partners to take an educational approach to reaching their audience. So, it's really all about bringing value and bringing, value that I think a lot of times people get caught in value prop, features, benefits, instead of let's talk about what it's like to be on the front lines day to day. And let's give you some real actionable insights. And yeah, there are some of the things that we do talk specifically to products, but a lot of the things that we do really just highlight subject matter expertise. And, we want to be engaging and very informative. And so all of the brands are built on that premise. Most of them get CEs for the content that we create from the organizations that offer continuing education or points, depending on what you're talking about. And the differentiator from the brands, really, Beyond Clean is the flagship, and it was focused on the sterile processing industry, which honestly needed a lot to get awareness raised and elevate that profession. And there was an enormous amount of passionate folks out there that have been doing this job for 20 years. And we really wanted to give them a voice. And so that's why we call ourselves the voice of sterile processing. Also, it's a great play on words with the podcast. First case is for the operating room. Power supply is for healthcare supply chain. And I would say healthcare supply chain, especially, very common in sort of, I would say before the pandemic, nobody even knew what supply chain was. They very similarly were like sterile processing, people who worked in the basement or maybe an offsite boardroom, but a lot of people just didn't know materials management, supply chain, purchasing, procurement. And they're very much on a similar trajectory as sterile processing, where the awareness of the profession is really growing. So we want to be a voice for all of those brands and really, elevate those professions and the people that are working on the front lines really hard in healthcare every day.
That is fantastic. So, considering Beyond Clean being the flagship, how long has it been around?
Yeah, a little over 5 years. And really, if you go to the website beyondclean.net, you can see literally how the company was started. So I had worked for a company. I left. I was writing out a non-compete. I was about to start with a company and start selling back into the sterile processing space. I had been educating on a regional and national level around sterile processing and sterile processing topics for a number of years before I took a little bit of a hiatus. And as I was coming back in, I was now in a startup company and taking an additional job, right? So I had flexibility. People always ask me, you do this podcast for the Celtics, how come you're not podcasting in healthcare? And it was like, I've only got one employer. And if they don't like what I say on my podcast, I might no longer have an employer. So I never really did. And Hank was already, he had run for the presidency of Isham, which is now HSPA. And he had lost that candidacy, and he was really looking for a voice, and he was writing. And I realized that this was a good time for me to potentially start podcasting on the professional side of my life, not just personal pastime. And it made sense to partner with somebody who already had a voice. So I shot Hank a message on LinkedIn. And if you look, it was after midnight, like it was late at night. And I just shot him the message and said, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? And you can read the rest of the dialogue, but it's kind of history from there.
Oh, that is the coolest story ever. So let's get some context here. And I'm going to boast a little bit on you. Your podcast, Beyond Clean, has surpassed 1 million downloads. And I'm saying that so that everybody listening has some context into how serious of an accomplishment you guys really had here. Sterile processing was a little to almost unknown space within medical sales. To be even a rep in sterile processing, even today, people are like, wait, what? I didn't even know that was a thing, right? And you guys were able to take such an unknown space and create 1 million downloads within 5 years. That's huge. Talk to us a little bit about what drove that. What could you say is a secret sauce behind making that happen? Outside of course, wanting to provide value for your audience.
I think one of the biggest reasons is we got enormous support from the industry, and we got enormous support from the frontline technicians that were out there. They wanted a voice, they wanted to be heard. And, the level of passion amongst that industry and for recognition. And honestly, one thing that we were willing to talk about from the beginning was just pay scale for the folks that are working in that department. And a lot of people would talk about it, but I don't know that it ever really got an elevated voice. So there were a lot of things that we were willing to talk about, topics that might have been considered taboo in the past. And I just think the industry embraced us. I also think that once the podcast started to take off, and believe me, Hank had already done an enormous amount of work to cultivate that audience and give it a voice through his writings and his posts on social media. But then from there, it was like, where can we go? Can we do conferences? And then we wound up doing virtual conferences when everything shut down. And it was the constant growth around education that was the secret sauce. And also we would bring in people who might not be noted industry experts, but they would come on and they would get a voice on the podcast to maybe talk about a success story in their department, or to talk about a challenge, or to expose something that was sort of an idiosyncrasy in the industry that was causing them a challenge. Like, there's no good answer to this question. We have this and this, and these are competing expectations. And every day on the front lines, we have to make, kind of a judgment call, and we have to create a facility policy and live with that, or we're not getting technological advancements in our department. So how do we accomplish, these increasing requirements of our department as medical devices get more sophisticated when we're not being invested in? And so those were the kinds of conversations that were happening on the show. And I just think, giving people an opportunity to say what needs to be said is one of the best ways to, grow an audience in general and make them feel like they have stake in the game, and that by listening and participating, that they're becoming part of a movement. And honestly, just to take it to the 1 million downloads, we celebrated by releasing the very first studio album of songs dedicated to sterile processing. We've got country, we've got pop, folk, like all of that. Nobody's ever done that. And I'm sure Hank,
wait. That the first studio album dedicated to sterile processing, who created that?
It's really Hank Balch's idea. He is a mastermind, and his whole concept was, we need to create a culture. And we talk about culture, it's not just a content culture, it's not just a work culture. He and his wife are writing a children's book about sterile processing. So he may not have bragged up on that when he was doing his interview with you, and I love to tout his genius, but he's a visionary, and his visionary abilities, this is the kind of thing, is he's talking about culture. What is in culture? Music, art. We have all kinds of art that we've, sort of digitized from scenes from within sterile processing and on the front lines. So art, music, books, literature, that's what we're really talking about. That's the big vision, from Hank's standpoint. And, honestly, we've read a number of books, and Traction is maybe a book that I'd recommend,
that's the number one. Yep. Number one book right there. I love that.
So they talk about visionaries and integrators. Hank's the visionary and I'm the integrator. And that's how that all comes
you guys
together.
Are a match made in heaven. So when you say, so this is actually really interesting. So you guys are creating like a sterile processing world, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, we're not the only ones creating it. Anything that's ever gone viral has gone viral because everybody gets involved, right? Think about a meme. What's a meme? The memes take off because everybody takes ownership of the meme and the elevation. They do what they want with it. Yeah. And that's how it gets sticky. And so, I think we have a vision for it. We created a platform, to further that and to get really creative and to create that kind of sticky energy and that culture. But honestly, it's all the people out there that have, when we started Beyond Clean, there was no other podcast. When I started my Celtics podcast, there were no other podcasts. If you go look now, there's 30 to 50 podcasts covering the Boston Celtics. A guy who writes for The Athletic, Jared Weiss, coined me the Podfather for Celtics podcasters. But it's the same thing with Beyond Clean. Now there's 10 podcasts about sterile processing. We're not trying to be the only podcast. We're trying to be one of the podcasts. It's great that we were the first podcast, but to really accomplish this kind of vision, you need all kinds of content flooding the market. Even one business or one entity, cannot elevate an industry on its own. It just can't.
Wow. That's phenomenal. And this led to, and part of this viral world that you guys are contributing to creating has led to Hank creating an album of music for sterile processing.
With a children's book on the way, yes.
I'm inspired. That's all I got. That's fascinating. Okay, so to give us some context about what your time looks like, this is not your full-time gig. Talk to us a little bit about what you do outside of being this amazing podcaster, and how much time are you actually spending in this fun space of work.
Yeah, I do spend a pretty good amount of time building these businesses. A lot of what I do as the integrator is to create business processes, workflows, automation. Our team is going to grow. So we're going to need a platform for everybody to be able to communicate. So kind of think of like an operational sales force,
Sure.
focused on what happens on the back end, how we line up guests for the educational podcast and really directing that kind of vision. So I do a lot of that. I also record an enormous amount of podcasts because I'm recording for all 4 brands. So, I do for each brand, for First Case, Beyond Clean and Power Supply, we're doing 32 episodes a year. So that's
Okay.
about 100 episodes there. We also do what we call a vendor spotlight. So that's a more of a partnership with our vendor and supplier partners and highlighting their products and services. So, you could look at another, probably 30 to 50 podcasts a year on that one. And I'm doing about 20 podcasts a year on the transmission control podcast.
Right.
So I do spend a good amount of time podcasting.
Yeah, you
I
do.
also am the VP of sales with another company. It's in the vendor credentialing space.
Okay.
It was a startup about 8 years ago and is now the fastest moving vendor credentialing company,
Wow.
on the market, and has grown enormously. And so I'm very proud of all of these businesses. And,
Absolutely.
you don't do it on your own.
Right.
I have been really lucky not only to be surrounded, by visionaries or really talented salespeople, like Lindsay Brown for Beyond Clean, and obviously Melanie, who creates all the content for First Case. And then I've got Hayes Waldrop and Gary Skinner, who do the Power Supply podcast, and they do their own things as well, like consulting and conferences. And then Larry Muscarella, a noted subject matter expert in the medical device kind of arena, is my co-host for Transmission Control. But I also have one of the greatest mentors in Sean Fitzgibbons, who started the vendor credentialing company and believed in me and brought me on board and gave me the opportunity to become an entrepreneur, and has never, tried to, hold me down on my other endeavors. All he wants is for me to grow, and we all succeed when we take that kind of growth mindset. And so I've been really blessed. Like, his mentorship has been, incredibly invaluable to me.
That is fantastic. Yeah, you have been blessed. That's fantastic. And to be able to recognize that and really live in it, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So take us back, because you have quite a colorful career. I mean, you're a VP now, you've been a medical sales rep, you've been a nurse, and I'm not going to spoil all of it. Take us all the way back to college. Okay. What were you thinking you were going to be? And what did you do or not actually do? And then, let's go all the way up to where we are today.
So graduating high school, I got a scholarship in chemical engineering. So
Okay.
I was headed off to the University of Maine to become an engineer. And that summer, I had worked at a camp for disabled children and adults, and had kind of gotten exposed to healthcare in that way. I was only working in the kitchen the first summer, but during my breaks, I would go work with my friends who were counselors and actually kind of spend time with the kids and the adults during the adult sessions, and really got kind of immersed. Then I go off to college, and granted, it's like every other engineering program, they're trying to weed you out. But I studied my brains out and went to the first test, and I got a 10 on my first chemistry test. And yes, it was out of 100. Now, the class average was 30, so it probably isn't as bad as it sounds.
All right.
But they weeded me right out between physics, calculus, chemistry. I think you can tell by now I'm a people person. Sitting down and doing equations just wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, I really like working with the kids. Next year, I'm going to go back to this camp. I'm going to be a counselor. I'm going to work with the kids and the adults all summer long. I basically did everything but IVs. I mean, I'm talking feeding tubes, anything you could think of personal care wise. Like, we were trained to do that. So that next summer I did that, and I thought to myself, I want to work with kids. So I'm either going to be a teacher or I'm going to be a nurse. Nurse pays more, gives you a little bit more flexibility. I'm going to start there, see how it goes. I went back to the camp that summer, worked as a counselor, came back to school, made dean's list the first semester in nursing. and stuck with nursing. But the ironic thing is that I wound up becoming an educator even as a nurse. So those two things still materialized.
Your
in their
passions
own
never
way.
die. Your passions
That's
never
right.
die.
Yep. So it's funny, but I think all of us have varied interests. And I would just say I'm a good example, and I would encourage anybody to take, whether they think it's just a passion and something they do as a pastime. I would encourage people to find ways to take all of those interests and create what their professional identity is. So, I have this background in nursing. I love people. I love educating. I started podcasting in 2004 to cover the Celtics when everybody else in New England was really just talking about the Patriots and the Red Sox. And, the Celtics were one of the worst teams in the league. And then all of a sudden they trade for Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, and they go from worst to first. I got credentialed access. I was the first person from new media to get into the locker room, was featured in a small budget documentary behind the scenes while they made that run. And it was just a ton of fun. And now here I am standing today, and I've got my sales and entrepreneurial, combined with my nursing and my educator passion and, the podcasting, like the whole thing has like merged, into my career. And you can do that. You just have to be willing to take an unconventional path.
I like it. I like it. Words of wisdom right there. You mentioned your mentor earlier. Was there anyone from a distance, maybe someone that's in the spotlight, that you kind of saw that inspired you to continue on your unconventional path? Or would you say that your unconventional path was more of you literally were just chasing your heart?
I was chasing my heart. I wish I could say that, I saw somebody else who blazed the path that I looked up to. I definitely came into a great deal of luck with a lot of mentorship throughout that path, but nobody really had done, any kind of, like, in many ways it was haphazard, but I also listened to people and what they were saying to me, instead of me putting my blinders on and saying, yeah, I've got this medical sales career and this is all it can be, and I'm going to climb the ladder at this one company and this is how I'm going to get there. People were telling me for a very long time, you should podcast in healthcare, and even then it took me a while. I had a lot of fear, and you could really hear that. And, nobody really accomplishes anything, when, they're worried about losing. You have to be willing to lose. And so when I left nursing, I sold my house for a $20,000 loss. I got help from my father-in-law. I moved my family and two young kids to a completely different state. And I started a career in mortgages in 2008, 2009, worst time to be in mortgages. I took this loss. We didn't have a lot of savings. I was working as a nurse. I made $12,000 that year in mortgages, $12,000 after taking an even bigger loss on the house. I got a lot of help from my father-in-law at the time. He kind of propped us up. I said I was going to give mortgages a year. It just turned out it didn't work out.
Sure.
So I can look at that, and granted, there were days I was on my way to work and I was in tears, right? Like, how am I going to do this? And I got to a point where the problem, I knew I wanted to be in medical sales for a while. The problem that I had was that as a nurse, nobody really took my application seriously. That shift work, you don't understand variable comp. The base salary at an entry level is not going to compare, like all of those things. And so I remember I applied to a lot of medical sales jobs. I only got one interview, throughout my 20s and early 30s. I failed at mortgages, and I put out probably 5 applications. I got 3 of those 5 companies to call me back for interviews. And I got an offer from the company I have ultimately, started my medical sales career with. And I remember going to their home offices in Ohio for the interview, and they had a more seasoned professional that I was interviewing against. And I found out later that they were pretty sure they were going to hire that guy. And when I came in, one of the biggest questions that I had prepared for, was sort of like, Justin, you've got this nursing background, tell us about, how do I take what appears on the surface to be a completely failed year in mortgages that would only say everybody was right that I wasn't meant to do sales, right? $12,000? Are you kidding me? How do you turn that narrative around? And I went into that interview and I basically said, I just failed miserably. I made $12,000 the last year in mortgages, but I learned a lot about sales. And the fact that I'm still sitting here after trying to get an interview for a medical sales job for the last decade and not being able to do that, the fact that I just made $12,000 my first time being a sales rep and I'm still sitting here telling you I want this job ought to tell you that I can handle variable comp. It ought to tell you that I want this. And so otherwise, I just go back to nursing. I could have gone back to nursing 3 months in, but I had things to learn. And I think that story is what really moved it forward. Honestly, I think that's the reason I got the job.
That's a phenomenal story. So what was your first job in medical sales? What was it?
Yeah, so it was with a company called Spectrum Surgical. Ultimately, it got acquired by the Sterile Corporation. And we did medical instrument repair, and we also sold a number of processing essentials and surgical instruments, like kerosenes, a lot of specialty instruments, some rigid scopes, but a lot of it was repair, on-site stainless steel, off-site stainless steel, rigid scopes, flexible scopes, the kind of standard instrument repair categories. And the company I was with, was very much focused on doing education and requiring sales reps to deliver education to the customers. And we also had to get certified through the professional trade organization, HSPA now was ISHM, and get our CCSVP. So you had to do that within a year. And then at my year anniversary, I had to deliver the baseline education to the owner and founder of the company, who was one of the most noted speakers at the time, Rick Schultz, in sterile processing. No pressure at all. Back to the owner, the guy who made the education. You have to deliver it back to him. So apparently I made an impression and I did really well. And then we left that, annual meeting and everything else. And I got a call a month later from this guy, Matt, who was, kind of one of their top sales guys, and kind of oversaw a lot of the sales operations and a lot of the marketing and whatnot. And he said to me, he said, Justin, you did a really good job learning the education and presenting it back to Rick. Here's the thing. We just got a call. We built this whole booth so we could do in-booth education at AORN this year for the very first time. And Fiedler is going to be doing the approvals for all of those presentations for continuing education credits. And the problem is, for you to get approved to do that in-booth education, you have to be a nurse. You're the only nurse on the team.
Wow.
The conference is next month. Can you learn this other educational program and be ready to deliver it at AORN's annual conference in our booth in a month? And I said, yes, I'll do it. Of course I'll do it. And, I wound up delivering, I think it was like 12 25-minute presentations over the 2 days. And then, the rest was history from there. I really enjoyed it. I kind of found a calling, and, I began doing, I really built a lot of my sales foundation on education. So it's no surprise that these brands are growing and thriving under the same kind of concepts.
Man, you created quite a fun, when you talk about everything you've been doing, it's like you're living in a fun world of a world that you created.
Yeah, that's literally how I feel about it. It's a ton of fun. And I've learned a lot about business. Coming in as a nurse, really no business background. One of the first things I did was I got involved with the local ARM chapter so that I could understand supply chain. And I wound up becoming the education chair for 5 years and sitting on the board of the chapter out of Southeastern Pennsylvania called CPAC. And I did that to grow my experience, but then even moving into this entrepreneurial space and working with, our CFO, and just starting to understand all the things on the back end of a business and what it really takes to run an organization and some of those responsibilities. Like, I definitely didn't get that training in nursing school.
Right. You taught it yourself. Okay. So here you are now. It sounds like you're living the dream. You got all these thriving businesses. You're podcasting and educating your heart away. Where do you see this going? Do you look at it like every day is an adventure and it's going to go where it goes? Or do you have some type of end goal?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think anytime that you're so hard and fast on an end goal that, again, it's the blinders, then you're not gonna move. You're not gonna allow, and honestly, it can be kind of stifling to not allow for the creative process and influence to come in. So do we have a hard and fast goal? No. What I do believe is part of the reason we created these other brands was to really target the audiences that are doing the front lines, and then also creating content for, director, supervisor, manager level. But the whole idea, I think, is more of these brands, more content. And ultimately, one of the other things is cross collaboration from brands, so that, if you sell into healthcare, that these departments are very siloed. Healthcare is very siloed. One of the things that we see on a bigger picture vision for all these different brands is to start crossing over. So like conferences that have supply chain and sterile processing content, OR and supply chain content, OR and SPD content. And then what about biomed? What about, so the list goes on, right? Infection prevention. We start to pull all of these different perspectives into a conference and appeal to both, but we've cultivated the frontline audience. I think having a broader, beyond the silo perspective could be really healthy for healthcare. And so that's where we're going with that. So the vision is, let's build this out. When you look at, a company like Becker's, right? Kind of a similar concept to what we're doing, but I would say Becker's is really a top down kind of approach to content creation. And you could look at what we're building with all these brands as more of the bottom up approach, where, nowadays with all the aggregation in the healthcare systems, you kind of know, like, from a sales perspective, which I think is really relevant to your audience, you can go in and you can sit down with the CEO or the COO, and they'll be like, we love it. We love it. Now go convince these 30 people as part of this large health system that they should do it. And so you might get the stamp of approval, but you've really got to go out and do that front lines legwork. I kind of look at it like from an educational standpoint, we're out there working on that front lines, creating that kind of content, and then also getting them to understand each other's perspective. So, that would be kind of like the difference between a Becker's and what we're building with all these brands.
Sure. This has been fantastic, Justin. I'm sure everybody listening is saying, I would like to spend a day with Justin and just see what the day is like. What? So I'm going to give them some of that. And I want you to walk us through from morning until night. What does the day look like for you?
All right. So my alarm goes off at 5. Some days I hit snooze till 5:30. Some days I hit snooze till 6:30. Depends on, what I was doing the night before.
Sure.
I get up, I get some coffee. I kind of organize my day on my computer. Sunday night is my ritual. I lay out what I'm going to do every day. I have a whole plan. I'm very calendar and block scheduling, kind of minded in the way that I lay out my week, but I leave lots of room for flexibility. I know things are going to get canceled. I have plenty of projects that will fit in. So I kind of lay it out that way. I get up in the morning. I kind of do the things that I know I need to have focus time on. I'm fresh. And if I don't do it then, I'm probably going to get distracted throughout the day. I have a lot coming at me throughout the day. I'm on calls most of the day, back to back. I've been known to do, 5 to 6 hours of Teams to Zoom to what, any to the podcasting platforms, just bounce. A lot of times, I'm on strategic calls and I'm still keeping some emails moving to make sure that things are flowing and constantly in motion. I usually wrap up around 5 or 5:30. A lot of times I'll then take my daughter to softball, and, I kind of involved as sort of like an assistant coach. And so, I stay involved in that. If I'm not doing that, I may wrap up a little bit of work. I'll usually, I'll cook. My son's 19. He's an intern with our company. He's
All
living
right.
with me right now as he sort of wraps up college. And
Right.
so we might spend some quality time. I might even play some Madden. I love playing Madden on the PlayStation. Um, and then I usually wind up doing some podcasts or doing some more work in the evenings. And then I'll go to bed usually between 10 and 10:30. But the day is full. There's very little downtime for me most of the time.
Yeah.
I do break up my morning with some exercise. So like after I get my coffee and get situated for the day, I'll work out for about 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Then I shower, have breakfast, and get back into it.
Full day. Listen to that. And you found all this family time to fit in. That's beautiful.
The
Um,
best advice on that is
yeah.
is be involved with your kids' activities because it becomes a commitment. It's so
Mm,
easy, especially as you're building your career, for you to then be like, all right, I'm not going to go to that practice because I just sit on the sidelines.
sure.
Or, I'm gonna try to make that game, but I can't make that game because of
Sure.
if you commit to the team, that if it's a team, it could be anything, right? Like I have
Mm,
one of my children is in like plays, right? So if you commit to being part of those things, then you're automatically involved, and then it's quality time instead of you
mm,
just chauffeuring them around. So
right.
the family time piece is just like with work or getting involved with professional trade organizations. And I wasn't good at that at the beginning of my career. I realized as I was building my medical sales career that if I didn't do that, I wasn't going to be involved in their lives as much as I wanted to. So
Got it.
that's my advice early and often. You can make it fit into your schedule.
Okay.
It helps to make a commitment. So
I love it. I'm gonna ask you a question about challenges now. I wanna hear when, well, I mean, what does a challenge look like for you? You're having so much fun. When you have a challenging day, what kind of things are, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, going wrong?
yeah, it's almost always operational.
Okay.
It's almost always related to communication. It may be an execution issue from somebody on the team. Sometimes, I mean, I like to really focus on processes and not people when it comes to improvement. When you
Got
start,
it.
it doesn't mean you can't, it doesn't mean that there isn't a people issue sometimes. But when you're trying to move everybody forward instead of getting caught up in the blame stuff, you really got to focus on the process, which is why I'm a big believer in automation. We happen to use HubSpot as our platform. They have a nice service hub that we leverage. We do a lot of tasking, but then that
Sure.
allows us to kind of look at the ops and like, where's the bottlenecks? Who's the bottlenecks with? Who needs help? And
Right.
we're just constantly trying to advance that. So for me, when a challenge arises, typically it's something didn't happen that should have happened, and then how do we push that forward, and or
Gotcha.
how do we make it right? And I think a lot of times people don't want to go to their customer and say we messed up, but I can assure you, especially in the healthcare realm right now, with the way that things have been,
Yeah.
nothing will give you more credibility and integrity in this
Owning.
industry than to come clean as fast as possible and let them know that you're doing everything that you can and keep them updated on where you're at in the corrective action process. If you do those things, you're going to be in pretty good shape, honestly. But so many people are scared of that. So, typically the challenges that come up is, hey, we committed we would do this and now we can't do it. Or,
Okay.
our timeline on this, we're not going to meet the timeline.
Sure.
Those kinds of things and I think that's pretty common for most businesses. I'd
Yeah.
spent a
No,
lot
it's
of
real.
time in sales, but I'm doing a lot of operations.
Right. Right. Well, let me ask you this then. So, on days when it just seems like nothing is going right and you're frustrated and you're thinking, man, what's happening? What kind of motivates you to just keep on going? Is that something that's just naturally in you, or do you kind of focus on something that makes, what, I'm doing it for this reason? What's your guiding light in that respect?
Yeah, I just can't imagine working for somebody else. That's probably the biggest, motivation, to be honest
Figure
with
it
you.
out. You will be
Yeah,
working for somebody else.
that's right. If I can't do this, then somebody else is going to tell me how to do my job. One of the things I figured out early on when I became a medical sales rep was
Yeah.
I need to put pressure back on the company. the minute the company is putting pressure on me, there's something wrong. And everybody you got to feel that vibe. If they're coming at you and that
you hear that, everybody needs to write that down. That's a good one. That is a good one. I like
gotta put the pressure back on the company. I got this order and now you're not able to deliver. That is a much better place to be than, hey, Justin, you didn't hit your quota. Right. And so I think a lot of times when people don't hit their quota, it's because they don't think that the company's going to come through for them sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's lack of basic sales skills, but anybody who's actually a decent sales rep, they lose confidence. You can't lose confidence. Your job is to put the pressure back on the company to deliver for your customer and for you to constantly advocate for your customer. You're not going to lose a job doing that. You're not going to lose a customer either if you're honest with them. It's the best position to be in. And so, I've always subscribed to that. I don't want to be under somebody else's thumb. The worst thing that can happen, you got to know you're in trouble when somebody, or you hear that somebody said, I just don't even really know what Justin does. What does Justin do? That is the kiss of death. If you're in a sales org and somebody drops that hammer on you,
it's all over.
It's all over. You are in serious trouble. And sometimes you deserve it, sometimes you don't. But if you keep pressure on the company to deliver because you're growing, and you're out there hustling, you're pretty much going to have nothing to worry about in your career.
I love it. Justin, it has been a pure treat chatting with you about the world. I'm gonna call it the world of, what I say, sterile processing, the world of sterile processing. Is that fair?
Surgical services, healthcare,
surgical services,
social media. Like, you could go.
All right, we'll throw it all in there. But this has been a treat. We're gonna come to a close now. I'm gonna ask you 4 questions. It's called the lightning round. You have less than 10 seconds to answer every one. And are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. So Justin, what is the best book you've read in the last 6 months?
Yeah, Traction. Yeah, that's a recent read, and I love it.
That book is right up there. I love that book. All right. Okay. And then what is the best TV show or movie you've seen in the last 6 months?
Ooh, that one's tough. I'm trying to think. I have not watched a lot of TV lately.
That's not a bad thing.
I'm a series guy. Like, I like Stranger Things and whatnot.
All right.
So,
Stranger Things.
Yeah, we'll go with Stranger Things.
Stranger Things. That's a great. I mean, that's a classic. So it's become a classic. So it's definitely. All right. What's the best meal you've had in the last 6 months?
Oh man, I went out to dinner at this restaurant in Kennebunk, Maine.
Kennebunk, Maine. You have to give us the name.
I cannot remember the name.
Killing me right now.
I'd have to look it up. I just went there. I don't know why it's escaping me.
What did you have?
So we had like oysters on the half shell, which were amazing. And there were three different oysters. And then we had like this, it was like this fried cheese, and they had the most amazing bread. And then I had and then they had a really eclectic mix, but I had a ramen soup that they homemade the ramen noodles, and it was phenomenal. It was really phenomenal.
You have to figure out what that name is.
I'll have to get back to you on it. I should know off the top of my head.
Everybody wants to know now, and whenever we're in Kennebunk, Maine, that's the first place we're going to. All right, and then last question: what's the best experience you've had in the last 6 months?
Best experience in the last 6 months, honestly. I celebrated Christmas with my kids, and it's the first time that I was kind of on my own doing Christmas with them. And so I did all the shopping. I got all the gifts. I did it all. And I really came up with some things that I know that they love that they would never have asked for. One of my kids even said, I've been thinking about this forever and just never thought to ask for it. This is such a great present. But honestly, lots of things happens in our personal lives. This has been a pretty tough year, from some standpoints. And and to have that Christmas with the kids. And I love my family, man. And I got some really great kids. And so, any quality time. I also did a road trip where we just back in June, I rented a minivan, and we had no destination, and we spent a week just on the road. We just got the hotel for the day the next day, and stopped and made some TikToks with the kids. So that was definitely not a 10-second answer, but all my time with my kids, the best experience I've had in the last year.
That is fantastic. Justin, it's been amazing talking to you tonight. We're going to be seeing some more things coming from the world of, we'll call it the world of everything that we mentioned earlier. So we'll be on the lookout for more things. Thank you so much for the time, and we can't wait to hear what's going on next.
All right, Samuel, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And that was Justin Poulin. Fascinating stuff. What I really love about talking to Justin is all the amazing things he's done in the podcast space. As a podcaster myself, it's really cool to hear of someone that's just enterprise at the way he's done and been able to channel so much information to so many nuanced audiences. So you might be listening to this and you might be thinking to yourself, I want to do some of the things that Justin's done. Or maybe Justin talked about a space that you haven't even known about regarding medical sales, and now you want to get into it. Well, regardless what your interest is, you know that if you've listened to my podcast for any amount of time, this is where you come to listen if you want to find out what you can do to get into medical sales, whether it be pharmaceutical, medical device, genetic testing, diagnostic testing, you name it, we can help you get there. Make sure you visit evolveyoursuccess.com. You've heard me say it so many times before. If you're still on the fence, take action, do something different. Visit evolveyoursuccess.com and let's help you get into the position that you've been dreaming about. Make sure you tune in next week for another episode of the Medical Sales Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And remember, I have a couple programs that show you exactly how to break into the medical sales industry, become a top-performing medical sales professional, and also how to masterfully navigate your career to executive-level leadership. Check out these programs and learn more at evolveyoursuccess.com. Stay tuned for more awesome content with amazing interviews.